Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwinska and you're watching World News Tonight. The first round of the presidential elections is valid, the Constitutional Court of Romania has announced. To the surprise of many, the populist and pro-Russian candidate won. The second round of elections will take place on Sunday. More on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at the latest headlines. As protests in Georgia intensify, the country's prime minister has said that the republic is in a state of self-purification. German Chancellor visits Kyiv for the second time since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, reiterates on Berlin's support. We now know the name and the details of the 2025 space mission that will see the second Polish astronaut in history travel into space. Romania's Constitutional Court has issued a ruling stating that the first round of presidential elections was in fact valid. Therefore, the second round will be held on Sunday this week. This follows yesterday's parliamentary elections, which produced a very fragmented parliament. Our correspondent, Paweł Trzaskowski, is on site in Bucharest to tell us more. Good evening, Paweł. So what can you tell us about the latest developments?
Well, Romanians are no longer kept in the dark when it comes to the future of the presidential elections. Indeed, today's Constitutional Court ruling states that the second round of presidential elections will be held as scheduled this Sunday. And in the presidential runoff, Călin Georgescu will face Elena Lasconi. Călin Georgescu is, let me remind you, an independent and controversial candidate who won the first round of presidential elections, mainly because of a very successful and mysterious TikTok campaign. I talked to Florin Zeru, a professor at National University of Political Studies today, and asked him what could benefit Georgescu in the presidential runoff.
If Călin Georgescu wins, you have to think what we can do to reconnect our country, because we are very divided. I think this division of the country is a fertile ground for narratives that are not so good for our direction. Narratives that are coming from East throughout social media platforms, and we are very vulnerable in this moment. So we have to think of all options. And we have to think what we can do better to have a stronger country.
In the presidential runoff, Călin Georgescu will be facing Elena Lasconi, the leader of the centrist anti-establishment USR party, which got 12% in yesterday's parliamentary elections. According to some experts, 12% is a bit of an underperformance on the part of USR. Anti-establishment voters instead decided to vote for the hard-right parties, which in total got 32% of support. I spoke today to Radu Magdin, a political analyst, and asked him to explain this phenomenon of right-wing leaning of Romanian society.
Unfortunately, our population gets a feeling that it never ends. I mean, it started with COVID. We had an economic fallout of COVID. Then we had the war in Ukraine. Then we had the energy crisis. Then we had inflation. I mean, it's like a never-ending nightmare. And I think we have to also understand people who are voting for the extremes, because these people have lost 5 years of their lives.
In Romania, it is the president who nominates the prime minister, who is then tasked with forming a new government. And given the current political fragmentation of Romania and the fact that none of the contenders in the presidential race supports the current governing coalition of Social Democrats and National Liberals, who could potentially form a new ruling coalition, a lot is still possible. We are still not certain of the future shape of Romanian government. Back to the studio.
That was Paweł Trzaskowski reporting from Bucharest, Romania. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited Kyiv on Monday for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Scholz's unannounced visit, only his second since the outbreak of the full-scale invasion, was intended as a show of support to Ukraine from Berlin ahead of snap elections in Germany early next year. We now go to our Ukrainian correspondent, Oz Kataji, who is in Kyiv. Hello, Oz. Good evening. So what are the key takeaways from the German Chancellor's visit, and is it good news for Kyiv?
Well, this was the first visit from Olaf Scholz since July 2022. So only his second visit to Ukraine since the war began. So it is a rather remarkable event to have happened, particularly so late in Olaf Scholz's tenure as Chancellor. As you said, he's heading into snap elections. Now, on arrival, he announced a 650 million euro aid package, military aid package to Ukraine, which included air defense systems, including Patriot launchers, as well as tanks and armored vehicles. So this was an aid package that part of these aid was already promised to Ukraine that will now be delivered at the end of Scholz's term. But there were other issues. They spoke today together at the conference. And obviously tensions have been strained recently between Berlin and Kyiv, given Olaf Scholz's phone call to President Putin, which Zelensky brought up and said this does not strengthen Ukraine. So very honest and frank words exchanged between the two leaders in Kyiv on Monday. Let's take a listen to what they both had to say earlier on in the day.
My very clear message from Kyiv to Russian President Vladimir Putin: we are in this for the long haul, and we will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. We have talked not only to the current American administration, with which we've had very good cooperation in this regard, but we have also already talked to the future President Donald Trump too. I believe that we can be set on developing joint policies. This is everyone's aspiration. It is possible to do so, and in itself logical. This December, a sixth IRIS-T SLM system and further Patriot launchers, as well as more Gerard anti-aircraft tanks. In 2025 too, we'll supply further air defense systems, howitzers, strike and reconnaissance drones, artillery ammunition, as well as 6 Sea King attack helicopters, just to mention a few of what is to come. We still don't know for sure, but we hope that the new administration of the United States will provide strong, even stronger than now, support to us. We hope that the politics of the United States won't change, but we have to already raise it while having talks here in Europe. We have to think about more ways to support our country, no matter the challenges that might await us.
Now, Olaf Scholz and President Zelensky did make a visit to the Maidan Square memorial for soldiers that have been that have fallen in the fight for Ukraine. Rather poignant scenes there. One of the things that wasn't discussed in this trip is Olaf Scholz's hesitance to provide Ukraine with the Taurus cruise missiles that Ukraine has been asking for. Now, it's notable because this is something Olaf Scholz's main opponent in Germany has been calling for and criticizing Olaf Scholz for. So no movement on that here, which won't make Kyiv as happy as it would want to, but the news of further military aid will come welcome here, particularly as we head into 2025, uncertain of what the US will decide to do with military aid.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Kataji coming to us from Kyiv. Protests in Georgia are intensifying. Crowds have taken to the streets following the decision of the Georgian Dream Party to suspend EU membership negotiations until 2028. Protesters were met with a violent response from the police, who deployed water cannons and tear gas to stop the marchers. Let's hear more from our correspondent Don Arleth, who is on the ground. Good evening, Don. So tell me, how is the situation on the ground? Do we see any differences, any changes from what you've seen yesterday?
Oh yeah, big change, big change. We had just prepared you a report. There was problems getting the video sent. The police have completely cracked down on the protesters much earlier than the other nights. They completely cleared out the area in front of the parliament. We were just standing up here. The police officers won't even let us show a picture of the road. The protesters have all been pushed off to the side streets. We know now at least 200 people at least have been detained since these protests began. We have no details as far as numbers go because there's no such statistics actually. But I was saying in my earlier report, we were going along the crowds, and you could see a lot of people having bandages, earlier injuries that they sustained at these protests. And tonight, like I said, brutal crackdown by police. They detained several people in front of the parliament. They also fired tons of tear gas. We also got a good taste of that tear gas. So a very big difference tonight from what we've seen from these earlier protests.
Don, please keep yourself and the entire team safe. Thank you so much for reporting. Don Arlith coming from Tbilisi, Georgia. The Georgian Prime Minister has said that the republic is in a state of self-purification. The statement came after thousands of public employees signed an open letter against the government's freezing of negotiations on the country's accession to the EU.
On another day of protests, public officials, including employees of ministries and courts, joined in. 3 pro-democracy NGOs have issued a statement saying that authorities are exerting pressure on public servants who openly condemn the government's anti-EU policy and are offering them advice in case they're fired. This new wave of large-scale protests was triggered by this statement on November 28.
We have decided today not to put the issue of opening negotiations with the European Union on the agenda until the end of 2028.
The Prime Minister, whose press conferences still feature the EU flag, now says that he has not stopped the EU accession process. After all, it's the government's constitutional duty to facilitate Georgia's European integration process.
We have not suspended anything related to the European integration. It's just a lie. And there are the opposition leaders, there are the media outlets linked with the opposition who are just lying to these people. But nobody has suspended the European integration of Georgia. We are very much committed to the European integration.
That's a propagandistic narrative to somehow portray itself, the ruling party, as the pro-Western political force. They follow this ideological line in order to avoid some kind of affiliations with Russia.
The ruling party maintains that the October elections were democratic and has ruled out a rerun, despite confirmed instances of ballot stuffing, voter intimidation, violence near polling stations, and bribery on the election day. Last week, the European Parliament voted to withhold recognition of Georgia's October parliamentary elections and called for sanctions against key figures from the ruling party. On Monday, the 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, barred 11 officials of Georgia's ruling party from entering their territories. The list includes the founder of the party, billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, who made his fortune in Russia.
The Baltic foreign ministers have decided in the last few days to actually take action and apply restrictive measures with regard to the entrance of those violators of Georgian protests.
Amid the turmoil, the new parliament will elect new president this December. It's the first time the president of the republic will be chosen not by popular vote, but by parliament, thanks to amendments to the constitution in 2017. The problem is that the president does not recognize the parliament as lawfully elected. Therefore, she will not recognize the parliament's vote on the republic's next president. In an exclusive interview for TVP World, she expressed her fears about Georgia's growing ties with Russia.
You have to see that each and every step that this government is taking against the European Union and to sever the links with the European Union are complemented by Mr. Putin, Mr. Medvedev or Mr. Dugin. So that is very clear for the Georgian population.
French-born President Salome Zurabishvili is seen by the opposition as the last hope for a democratic future of Georgia. She says she will stay in office until a legitimately elected president, chosen by a democratically elected parliament, is sworn in. The Prime Minister, however, says that if she fails to leave office until the end of December, she will be removed forcefully.
The threat of reduced U.S. military support for Europe is continuing to occupy the minds of leaders in Brussels. Work is underway by Poland and others to plug potential gaps by boosting the bloc's defense spending as Warsaw prepares to take on the presidency of the EU Council next year. It comes as experts warn that Donald Trump is more likely to force Kyiv and Moscow to the negotiating table rather than leave Ukraine high and dry.
TVP World hosted a key debate on Sunday exploring the premise Putin will never attack a NATO country. Around 3/4 of those polled disagreed with the motion. Many are concerned about what will happen when US President-elect Donald Trump assumes office next year. One contributor said he expected Trump not to turn his back on Kyiv and to force both sides into talks.
I think that Trump, after all, does not want to be humiliated. So,
in a sense, to lose the war as an American citizen, right?
Exactly. He won't be happy to be remembered as the American president that lost Ukraine and that lost to a weaker player like Putin. And so he will probably try to force a compromise, but force it on both parties, not just on the Ukrainians.
Germany's foreign minister, after meeting her Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing, warned that Putin is dragging Asia into the war in Ukraine. Annalena Baerbock said permanent members of the Security Council, like China, have a responsibility to promote peace.
Drones from Chinese factories and North Korean troops attacking peace in the middle of Europe violate our core European security interests.
It comes as information emerged that the Russian president has backed a 25% boost to military spending in 2025. The Institute for the Study of War estimates 41% of Russia's annual spending will be ploughed into national security and defence. The threat of a Donald Trump presidency pulling the plug on US funding for Ukraine and reducing American military commitments in Europe has prompted European finance ministers to explore how they can boost defence spending. Poland's Deputy Finance Minister Paweł Karbownik posted on X that there are ways to finance defence in Europe. But in case it looked like Europe was working as one, unconfirmed reports have emerged that Donald Trump has tapped Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán for his views on how to end the war in Ukraine. Orbán was widely condemned for his self-proclaimed peace mission after Budapest took on the rotating EU Council presidency in July. Radio Free Europe reports that Orbán is preparing for a second so-called peace mission later this month, before Hungary's EU presidency concludes.
Poland will have a blast-off. The first Polish space mission is named Ignis, meaning fire, and will feature the second Polish astronaut in history traveling to the final frontier.
And this fire means motivation and energy behind Polish people who built their economy.
Meet Sławosz Uznański from the Polish city of Łódź, an electronics engineer and researcher. And now he's going to do something only one Pole did before him.
The Ignis mission, part of Axiom Space Mission 4, will see the participation of ESA project astronaut and mission specialist Sławosz Uznański.
The Ignis mission, planned for the spring of 2025, is a research program on board the International Space Station. The team of 4 astronauts will conduct research in microgravity there.
3, 2, 1, ignition, engine full power,
Ignis will be taken to the International Space Station by Axiom Space, a privately funded space program that uses spacecraft from Elon Musk's SpaceX company. It's been 46 years since the first, and so far the last, Pole was sent into space. Mirosław Hermaszewski spent 8 days on the Salyut 6 Soviet space station in 1978, conducting geoscience experiments. As for Uznański, he will combine his life as an astronaut with working as a systems builder and operator of the particle accelerator at the Kern Institute's nuclear physics research program.
The new European Commission has begun its work. Its main point of focus is set to be defense. Meanwhile, Poland is soon to begin its presidency of the European Council. The turn of this year will bring a great many changes for Europe, but also for the world. In January, Donald Trump will return to the White House, what could change the future of support for Ukraine and America's role in the NATO alliance. To discuss how these factors are going to affect the defense spending, I'm joined by Paweł Karbownik, Polish Deputy Finance Minister. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio tonight.
Hello. Thank you very much.
So let's get to it. European countries may be forced to double their spending, defense spending, according to Bloomberg intelligence report. But the question is, since we're talking about money, are EU countries ready to double that spending at such a short notice?
Well, first of all, nobody can be forced to double spending, but certainly there is a serious discussion about increasing substantially the expenditures on defense. This is the discussion that we are having with regards to what is happening in Ukraine, and obviously the new Trump administration will certainly be a boost in these discussions because there is a new situation upcoming. So I think, yes, there will be a new momentum in these talks soon.
In the spring, the European Commission presented the first ever EU strategy on arms industry. It's supposed to, among other things, meant to help member states jointly purchase weapons and ammunition. Since it was first established and presented, what was achieved when it comes to that plan, and what yet has to be addressed?
So, first of all, we have to say that the European Commission is not a natural player in these talks, because the issues of war, peace, army are the national competence. So this discussion is primarily being handled within NATO and also among member states. But it's true that the Commission has estimated that Europe would need 500 billion euros to prepare itself for a crisis scenario. And this is probably the amount of money that we are talking about, so 500 billion euros, which needs to be found in national budgets, not in the EU budget, because it's not the reason why we have the EU budget. But we need to find a common financing among countries, most probably the countries who are really interested in defending Europe, so the coalition of the willing, as we call it. And yes, I think this is going to happen because we don't have much choice given the risks that Europe is facing.
In 2025, Poland will spend almost 5% of its GDP, so it's going to be the leader when it comes among NATO countries when it comes to defense spending on arms. But how do we make this allied deterrence credible, especially in the sense that Poland is actually one of the leaders when it comes to spending, but it does not spend the most out of all the countries?
Poland does spend the most.
It spends the most, but it's seen as a country with the highest GDP spending among the NATO countries. Yes. Yet among other countries, we come fourth. After Germany, after the UK, after France. So how do we make this credible to actually be able not only to have it, but also to show our strength and unity?
So I think we have the best credibility in the world, because 4.7% of GDP that we will be spending next year is the biggest contribution by far among all the NATO countries, including the US. So I think we have very strong cards in this, and this is exactly what we are talking about with our countries, with our friends from Germany, from France, from Finland, from the UK, from Norway. Because it's not only about, as I've said, it's not only about the EU. So the fact that we are spending 4.7% of GDP is shocking to some of our colleagues. We had the finance minister of Luxembourg the other day here in Warsaw, and he spends 1.3% of GDP. But yet he already committed that he wants to increase that to 2%. So as I said, this discussion is ongoing. We have a current German Minister of Defense who already said that Germany, who is spending now 2% of GDP, should spend between 3 and 3.5%.
Do you think this is it safe to say that this might be sort of a Polish effect? That other countries within the alliance, other countries in the European Union see that Poland is spending 4.7 and they're sort of inclined to think towards spending more as well?
Well, certainly Poland is an inspiration, yes, because people look at us and see, so how come you guys can do it? And we are a very good example that, you don't have to talk about it, you can just do it because you have no other choice. But is it Poland effect? I think, it's more sort of Putin effect or Trump effect probably, but not necessarily Poland effect.
So the gravity lays elsewhere. But especially considering that we are the eastern flank of NATO, is this enough? Is this spending, defense spending, enough, especially in light of the further escalation that's taking place in the region currently and Russia becoming increasingly aggressive? Yes,
so basically I think, as NATO, we are safe. but it's a matter of preparing for the worst case scenario, which may happen within 2, 3, 4 years. So that's why we are talking about investing hundreds of billions now in common purchases and basically stepping up industry in Europe so that we have the ability to defend ourselves. I'll just give you one example. Germany, its stock of weapons is such as it was decades ago. And if it was to rearm itself at the current speed, it would need at least 2 decades to defend Germany. So 2 decades for Germans to get ready to defend themselves, not least speaking about Europe. So we really, there is no comfort of discussion. Everybody realizes that we have to do it now, and it has to be quick because the threat is real.
This is going to be this turn of the year is going to be a particular time. The beginning of 2025, Poland is going to take the EU presidency. We will have Donald Trump sworn into office as the 47th president of the United States. We have also, after what we found out after the US presidential election, going to have an election taking place in Germany.
Yes.
Does Poland have a chance to really make a difference, especially when it comes to defense, by taking that role, by stepping into the shoes of that EU presidency?
Yes, so we believe so. I mean, as we've discussed, there will be a Trump effect exactly on the 20th of January when Donald Trump will be taking office. Minister Domański, Polish Minister of Finance, will be chairing the meeting of finance ministers where they will be seriously considering what needs to be done in order to prepare Europe for a new geopolitical reality. And then in April, we'll have all the EU finance ministers in Warsaw exactly to discuss defense financing. So indeed, we are using these 6 months to seriously step up the effort and bring this discussion closer to a conclusion. I'm not saying that it's going to happen over 6 months, because these are serious processes, and as you've mentioned, there are elections in Germany, so we may wait a little bit longer, but I'm certain that we will have a successful conclusion of this discussion.
I'd like to take a moment because the European Commission will not agree to exclude Poland's defense spending from the excessive deficit procedure, as we've learned from Minister of Finance Andrzej Domański. However, he did express the hope that in the coming years the EU would adopt a different approach. Poland is investing into collective defense. This comes as no surprise. Shouldn't the EU actually consider to exclude it from the excessive deficit procedure? What's your opinion on this?
So I believe you have a quote from when we were negotiating with the Commission about this. And indeed, these were very thorny negotiations, and we were talking about including defense spending when assessing our deficit. And as a matter of fact, it did happen. So the Commission did take into account the effect of our spending, and that's why we also have a softer path when it comes to fiscal consolidation. So we'll be able to spend more in 25 instead of tightening the budget and saving, because of the fact that we are spending so much on defense. So this was corrected in the negotiations with the Commission.
Last but not least, Andrius Kubilius, he is appointed the Commissioner of Defense and Space. What is expected of him now that he's taking the office?
So I think we'll have certainly we'll have a great ally, because he's a former Prime Minister of Lithuania and he understands, the risks in the region, which is why we'll be meeting him next week in Brussels to discuss exactly what are the steps towards this ECOFIN Council of Ministers in Warsaw in April, and what will be the proposal of the Commission in the white book that the Commission is preparing on what has to be done in Europe.
Paweł Karbownik, Polish Deputy Finance Minister, thank you so much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you very much.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World, as we'll be back with more news and features in just a moment.